Sir, your champagne is ready. Garrett Whitmore III didn't even turn around. Did I ask you to speak? He raised one hand, silencing her like a dog. Then he smirked at his billionaire friends. Since this black girl is so good at carrying plates, maybe she can give me financial advice. His eyes turned cold. I've got $50 million, sweetheart. What should I do? Open a savings account at the welfare office? The laughter that followed wasn't normal laughter. It was the kind wealthy people used when they wanted the whole room to know their power. Forks paused mid-air, glasses trembled on stems, and in the middle of it all stood Felicia Turner. A woman the world never bothered to look at twice, except today when she suddenly became their entertainment. But the Meridian Club itself was already a stage built for arrogance. 42 floors above Manhattan, wrapped in gold accents and glass panels that mirrored the skyline, this private club wasn't a restaurant, it was a kingdom. A place where fortunes were traded over omelettes, and egos were bigger than the buildings below. The elevator required a membership card that cost more than a new car. Even the walls whispered wealth. Art worth millions, marble polished so deeply it reflected whoever walked across it like a confession. To the billionaires who visited every Saturday, this wasn't breakfast. It was a ritual, a performance, a weekly reminder that they were insulated from the world's consequences, and Garrett Whitmore. He wasn't just part of this world, he ruled it. At 58, he was the kind of man headlines worshipped and victims feared. Founder of a multi-billion-dollar hedge fund, collector of ruined companies, master of smiling on television while quietly gutting entire cities of their livelihood. His motto, one he repeated so often it became folklore, was simple. Money is the only language that matters. And now he was speaking that language to humiliate a woman he assumed couldn't answer back. Felicia stood perfectly still, the champagne bottle steady in her hand. Her face revealed nothing. Not the insult, not the sting, not the fury. She'd spent 2 years training herself to be invisible in a room like this. 2 years learning to let people like Garrett underestimate her. Today, that underestimation was about to cost him more than he could imagine. But for now, she simply breathed. Because she knew something Garrett didn't. In 15 minutes, every person laughing in this room would learn exactly who she really was. But before she exposed the billionaire, Felicia had to decide whether to stay silent again, or finally reveal the secret she'd carried for years. Felicia didn't rush away from the table. She didn't flinch, didn't apologize, didn't run to a manager like many waitresses forced into humiliation might. Instead, she placed the champagne bottle back into its ice bucket with calm precision, almost too calm. The room's laughter began to taper into curiosity. Who was this woman who didn't break? What they didn't know, not yet, was that Felicia Turner had once stood in a very different room. A room lined with glass and high-pressure brilliance. A room where she was not invisible, but celebrated. Goldman Sachs, top of her class, risk analysis prodigy. 3 years earlier, she'd had a corner office view of the city she now served food in. She'd been the analyst executives trusted, the mind they listened to, the woman whose ability to read markets bordered on instinct. She saw patterns no one else noticed. She connected dots others dismissed. She once corrected a flawed model during a meeting filled with senior managers, and she was right. Her future had gleamed like the skyline she used to admire, until the phone call, until the stroke. Until her mother, the only person who'd ever believed in her without hesitation, collapsed under years of stress, and grinding work inspired by Garrett's ruthless destruction of her brother's company. Felicia walked away from everything, her career, her income, her identity. She traded conference rooms for hospital rooms, spreadsheets for physical therapy schedules, and 6-figure projections for minimum wage shifts. She didn't complain. She didn't announce her sacrifice. She simply did what a daughter does when the world stops being fair. But she didn't stop being who she was. Every night, after her mother slept, she opened her laptop. Earnings reports, market trends, filings, patterns, footnotes. She studied them not for wealth but for control. Control she'd lost when her mother's life changed. And working at the Meridian Club? That was intentional. It placed her within earshot of the very man who destroyed her family, though he had never once actually seen her. What he believed was a harmless waitress he could mock was, in truth, quietly assembling a blueprint of his entire scheme. Every whispered phone call, every brag, every contradiction, every lie. Felicia hadn't come to the Meridian Club for tips. She'd come for timing. And today, that moment had finally arrived. Because when Garrett demanded she teach a billionaire how money works, he didn't realize she was about to give him the most expensive lesson of his life. The hum of polished conversations and clinking glasses softened as Felicia stepped back toward Garrett's table. Not as a server, but as something no one expected. Even the wealthy regulars, accustomed to drama-free luxury, felt the air stretch thin, electric. Garrett noticed the shift too. He smirked again, ready to escalate the mockery, his ego swelling with the attention of his audience. He thrived on moments like this, where he could flex dominance and cruel humor. He tapped his $100 bill against the table as if summoning a pet. "Well," he drawled, "our financial expert is back. Did you think of an answer, sweetheart? Stocks, bonds, or did you need Google to help?" This time, Felicia didn't wait for permission to speak. "Neither," she said calmly. The simplicity of her voice cut through the room, sharper than any insult he'd thrown at her. Garrett blinked. The table stilled, forks hovered mid-air. "What did you say?" he scoffed. "I said sell," she replied. "Sell everything you have in Nexus Technologies, before Tuesday." A ripple traveled through the room. A few patrons leaned closer. Garrett's associates exchanged puzzled looks. Garrett barked a laugh. "Sell? Nexus is climbing. I told millions of people to buy just last week." His voice swelled. "Do you have any idea what you're saying?" Felicia nodded. "Yes." There was no tremor, no hesitation, just truth. Caroline Hayes, the only genuinely cautious one in Garrett's circle, narrowed her eyes. She recognized that tone, the tone of someone who knew exactly what she was talking about. Garrett leaned back, theatrically offended. "All right then," he announced loudly, drawing every eye in the restaurant. "Let's make it interesting." The room held its breath. Garrett gestured toward the large CNBC screen. Nexus stock shimmered in green light. "If Nexus closes above $150 by Friday," he said, he pointed at Felicia with a flourish, "will stand on that chair, apologize to every person here, and admit you wasted our time." Felicia didn't blink. "And if it doesn't?" Garrett grinned. "Then I'll donate $100,000 to whatever charity your heart desires, on camera, with a smile." No one expected what Felicia said next. "Make it financial literacy programs," she replied, "for underserved communities, and yes, announce it live." A murmur passed through the room. Garrett flashed his teeth, thinking she had just dug her own grave. Done. They didn't shake hands. They didn't need to. Everyone in the Meridian Club had just become a witness. And for the first time in years, Felicia Turner wasn't invisible. But Garrett had no idea that the silent waitress had been studying him for months, and she was about to prove she knew his empire better than he did. Felicia stepped into the kitchen, out of sight, but not out of breath. She braced both hands against the cold steel counter and exhaled slowly. The echo of Garrett's laughter still clung to her, but it had lost its sting. Her heart thudded with something else now. Resolve. "Felicia, what did you just do?" Derek whispered, staring at her as if she'd ripped the ceiling off the place. "I told the truth," she replied, "and now I'm going to show it." She pulled the small notebook from her apron. The edges were frayed, the ink smudged from weeks of study and long nights. Every detail she'd collected on Garrett, every whisper, every anomaly, every SEC footnote, sat pressed between those worn pages. Derek stared at it. "You've been investigating him?" "I've been paying attention," she corrected softly. As she flipped through the pages, her mind drifted backward. Not to the club, but to the glass towers of Goldman, where she once belonged. She remembered her first year there, the pressure, the brilliance, the thrill of solving financial puzzles nobody else even saw. She remembered the day she identified a flaw in a model that had been approved by 3 senior analysts. She remembered the managing director's stunned silence, his grudging respect, the way he repeated her projection, as if discovering it himself. She had belonged in that world. She had earned that desk, until the night the hospital called. Her mother's stroke had snapped her life into two pieces, before sacrifice and after. She traded data models for feeding schedules, investment memos for medical bills. She taught herself how to lift her mother without hurting her, how to help her speak again, how to stretch pennies until they whispered. But numbers never stopped calling to her. Every night, she returned to the only thing that made sense: the markets, analysis, filings, truth hidden in fine print, and that truth led her here. Back in the present, Felicia folded her notes, slipped the papers into her apron, and straightened. She wasn't scared anymore. She was ready. She walked back into the dining room, not as the woman they dismissed, but as the woman who understood the game better than they ever could. Garrett saw her returning and spread his arms dramatically, performing for his audience. "Everyone pay attention," he announced. "We're about to hear a masterclass from the help." Felicia didn't react. She stepped closer. "Mr. Whitmore," she said steadily, "you asked for my advice. Let me give you a real analysis." The table fell into silence, and the waitress became the expert. Because once Felicia started speaking, the room would realize she didn't just understand the markets, she understood Garrett's secrets. Felicia didn't tremble, not once. She stood tall at the head of Garrett's table, surrounded by men who thought fortunes made them infallible. The dining room's noise dimmed until it felt like everyone was underwater, muffled, slow, waiting for the next heartbeat. "Nexus Technologies," Felicia began, her tone shifting into something crisp, informed, unshakably professional. "Ticker, NXT, current market cap approximately $8 billion, and you," she nodded toward Garrett, "have made 17 separate media appearances urging investors to buy." That number alone nudged shoulders at the table. Caroline Hayes subtly leaned forward. Garrett scoffed, but the flicker behind his eyes betrayed him. He hadn't expected precision, not from her. Felicia unfolded a piece of paper and placed it gently on the linen tablecloth. "Their latest 10Q filing," she continued, "page 43, footnote 12. A few gasps rippled across the room. No server should know where footnote 12 lived, let alone what it meant. Felicia tapped the highlighted line. "The company is cooperating with an informal SEC inquiry regarding revenue recognition practices." Caroline whispered, "How did I miss that?" Most people miss footnotes, Felicia thought, but she said aloud, "Because you don't expect a company valued at billions to be playing with their books. But they are." Garrett laughed loudly, too loudly. "You're pulling random legal jargon to sound clever." Felicia raised a second sheet. "Then let's move to accounts receivable." Garrett flinched, barely, but she noticed. "Nexus reported a 340% increase in receivables," she said, "while revenue grew only 12%. That's called channel stuffing, a classic sign of fraud." A dull thud echoed as one fund manager dropped his fork. Felicia continued, steady as a heartbeat. "And third, the auditors, Peterson and Associates, resigned last quarter, quietly, no explanation." The table went silent. "Major auditors don't walk away from multi-billion clients," she said softly, "not unless the house is on fire." Every face at the table had changed now. No more dismissal, no more amused smirks. They were listening. Garrett's voice cracked as he tried to retake control. "This is nonsense! You're a waitress! Nothing more!" Felicia didn't flinch. "And you're sweating, Mr. Whitmore." The room inhaled as one. For 2 years, these people saw Felicia as a shadow, a fixture, a background accessory. But now they leaned toward her the way they would toward a market prophet. Caroline Hayes stood abruptly, pulling out her phone. "I need to make a call," she murmured. Garrett glared at Felicia, fury simmering beneath polished arrogance. This wasn't supposed to be happening. But Felicia wasn't done. The evidence she revealed next would not only rattle Garrett, it would expose exactly how he rigged an entire market. Felicia's calm was unnerving, even to the onlookers who didn't fully grasp the financial language. It wasn't just what she said, it was the confidence behind it, the certainty of someone who'd done the work in silence for far too long. She pulled out another folded sheet of paper, each crease sharp with intention. "This," she said, "is where your story ends." Garrett stiffened. Felicia laid the page flat on the table and pointed to a series of dates. "Every time you praised Nexus on television," she explained, "the stock jumped. And within 48 hours, Whitmore Capital sold shares." She tapped the numbers. "March 15th, you appeared on CNBC. Nexus rose 4%. March 17th, your firm sold 200,000 shares." Gasps. "April 3rd, another media appearance. April 5th, another sale, 150,000 shares." A low murmur spread. These weren't guesses. These were receipts. Felicia met Garrett's eyes. This didn't happen once or twice. It happened 7 times. Same pattern, same playbook. Garrett's face drained of color. "That," Felicia continued, lowering her voice so only the table and everyone leaning in to hear would catch it, "isn't analysis. It isn't strategy. It isn't coincidence." She paused for impact. "It's a pump-and-dump scheme." The words hit like a courtroom verdict. One fund manager muttered a curse under his breath. Another swallowed hard, beads of sweat forming on his brow. Garrett slammed his hand on the table, rattling the silverware. "You're lying! You're twisting numbers to slander me." Felicia didn't react. "All public information. If it's slander to repeat SEC filings, you should call them." A diner at the next table, the kind of man who wore wealth like armor, stood up. "I put my retirement into Nexus because of you," he said to Garrett. "Are you telling me you were selling behind our backs?" Garrett opened his mouth. No words came. He reached for the facade he'd relied on his entire life. Control, charisma, dominance. But it slipped between his fingers like sand. Felicia tilted her head. "You asked me what financial advice I'd give you," she said softly. "Here it is. Stop lying." A sharp buzz erupted across the room. One phone, then another, then all. People lifted their screens at once. Confusion, shock, horror. The CNBC ticker on the wall flickered, and a red breaking banner screamed across it. Felicia didn't even need to look. She already knew. Because the moment that banner lit up, Garrett's empire wasn't just wobbling, it was beginning to fall. At first, no one understood what the buzz meant. Phones vibrated like a swarm of insects, screens lighting up across the dining room. Conversations died mid-sentence as people checked their notifications. Then one man gasped. Another cursed. A woman covered her mouth with both hands. A single voice sliced through the silence. "Oh my God!" All heads turned toward the massive CNBC screen mounted above the bar. The red banner blazed like a warning flare. "Breaking! SEC announces formal investigation into Nexus Technologies trading, halted pending review." The stock price beside the headline froze at $142.50. Garrett stared at the screen as if it had slapped him. The color drained from his face. His bravado melted. His breathing turned sharp and irregular. No, this is a mistake," he whispered. But no one was listening to him anymore. The room erupted into chaos. One of the fund managers, previously smug, previously unshakable, grabbed his phone with trembling hands. "I'm done," he muttered. "I'm completely done. I put $20 million into this." Another man shouted into his phone, "Sell everything! I don't care what it takes! Get me out!" The senator's aide backed away from Garrett like he'd just discovered a contagious disease. "We need to distance ourselves now," he muttered into his phone. "Issue a statement immediately." Garrett's allies, his entourage, his admirers, his orbit, began peeling away from him one by one. He lifted his head, eyes wide, voice cracking. "This is temporary! The stock will bounce! Everyone calm down!" But no one calmed down. Felicia stood perfectly still, the only island of quiet in the storm. She watched the panic spread like a fast-moving fire, burning through egos, shattering illusions, igniting fear. For once, the powerful saw consequences. Garrett stumbled toward Felicia, desperation twisting his features. You did this," he hissed. "You planned this. You set me up." Felicia didn't flinch. "No," she replied softly. "You set yourself up. You just never expected anyone to notice. A woman across the room suddenly shouted, "I bought 200,000 shares last month because of you." A wave of voices followed. "You lied to us. You said it was safe. You told us to buy. I trusted you." Garrett looked around, trapped in the circle of his own making. Felicia stepped closer, lowering her voice so only he could hear. "I warned you, sell before Tuesday." Garrett clenched his jaw, but the fear in his eyes betrayed him. The billionaire was finally learning a lesson he'd spent a lifetime ignoring. But Felicia hadn't revealed the most devastating truth yet, the part that would shatter Garrett far more than losing money ever could. For years, Garrett had dismissed the people affected by his ruthless decisions as collateral damage, statistics on spreadsheets, anonymous casualties of business. He never learned their stories, never cared to. But now, confronted, cornered, stripped of the illusion of invincibility, he made the mistake of looking at Felicia fully, truly, for the first time. And what he saw was not a waitress. What he saw was judgment. "Why are you doing this?" Garrett spat, desperate. "What do you want from me?" Felicia stepped closer, calm but deadly focused. "Not money, not attention, just accountability." Garrett scoffed, trying to rebuild the armor slipping off him. "Accountability? This is Wall Street. People lose money all the time." Felicia tilted her head slightly. "Not everyone lost money, Mr. Whitmore. Some lost much more." Confusion flickered across Garrett's eyes. "You don't even remember the people you hurt," she said quietly. "So, let me remind you." She took a breath, a slow, controlled breath she had waited years to take. "Morrison Medical Supply," she began. "New Jersey, small pharmaceutical distributor. You bought them in 2018. Garrett blinked, searching his memory. "I've done hundreds of deals." "Yes," Felicia said. "And this one destroyed 150 jobs, entire families, pension plans, life savings wiped out overnight." Garrett waved a dismissive hand. "It was a failing company. I simply accelerated the inevitable." Felicia's expression didn't change. "Thomas Morrison, the CEO, didn't think it was inevitable. He fought for his employees. He fought for the company you drained. He fought until he died of a heart attack at 54. A hush washed over the room. "And his business partner," Felicia continued, voice tightening with emotion she refused to show, "invested her life savings, 30 years of hotel housekeeping wages, into that company." Garrett swallowed hard, something uncomfortable twisted in his face. "And what does that have to do with you?" Felicia stepped even closer. "Everything." Garrett blinked, confused. "What?" "Thomas Morrison," Felicia said, "was my uncle." The room erupted in whispers. "And the woman who lost her life savings?" Felicia added, eyes locked on Garrett's. "My mother." Gasps, hands covering mouths, chairs scraping the floor. Garrett stumbled backward, the truth hitting him like a blow. I didn't know. I didn't—" "That's the point," Felicia said. "You never know. You never care to know." Her voice remained steady, but the room felt her pain like a tremor. "To you, they were numbers," she said softly. "But to me, they were everything." Garrett opened his mouth, but no words came. For the first time in his life, he was speechless. But Felicia still wasn't finished, because exposing Garrett publicly was only the beginning of the justice she had planned. Garrett stared at Felicia as though the floor had shifted beneath his feet. For a man who had spent decades calculating risks, anticipating threats, and predicting market shifts before they happened, this was the first time he truly looked blindsided. "You—" His voice trembled with disbelief. "You worked here, all this time, because of me." Felicia didn't look away. "No, I worked here because I needed to care for my mother. You were just the poison drifting through the air while I served water." The comparison stung him more than he expected. The restaurant was now silent, eerily so. Dozens of wealthy patrons sat frozen in their seats, listening not to drama, but to truth, to the collision of arrogance and consequence. Garrett tried to gather himself. He straightened his jacket, lifted his chin, attempted to summon his old persona, the titan of Wall Street, the man no one could touch. But it was like putting on armor after someone had already pierced it. This is personal vendetta, he barked, trying to sound powerful. You orchestrated this entire scene just to embarrass me. Felicia folded her hands calmly in front of her. Embarrassment is the smallest consequence of your actions, Mr. Whitmore. A woman at a nearby table whispered, She's right. Felicia continued, her voice smooth but devastating. You spent 8 months pumping a stock you knew was hollow. Every time you went on TV smiling, telling Americans to trust you, you sold shares behind their backs. She pointed toward the CNBC screen's red banner. And the SEC finally noticed what you refused to admit. Garrett shook his head violently. You're lying! You manipulated this! This is entrapment! A voice rose from across the room. Entrapment! A woman in a sharp gray suit stood, her press badge glinting. Mr. Whitmore, no one forced you to commit fraud. Garrett frowned. Who are you? Sarah Wade, she replied calmly. Investigative reporter, New York Times. Another wave of gasps rippled through the restaurant. I've spent 18 months building a case on Whitmore Capital, Sarah said, and Miss Turner here gave me her first piece of evidence 1 year ago. Garrett's knees nearly buckled. 1 year? He echoed. Felicia nodded softly. I didn't come here to trap you, Mr. Whitmore. I came here because you walked around this place bragging about your crimes like no one in the world could challenge you. Garrett's breathing quickened. The walls felt closer. The room grew hotter. And today, Felicia added, you finally handed me what I needed. Witnesses. Sarah lifted her phone. And a recorded confession. Garrett's face drained. He had just walked into his own downfall, but Felicia's final revelation, the one she saved for last, would shatter Garrett in a way prison never could. Garrett was trembling now, a foreign sensation for a man who had built his life on control. He reached for the last refuge of the powerful, intimidation. I'll sue you, he spat. Both of you, I'll bury you in court, No, Sarah Wade interrupted. You won't. Every eye snapped to her. She walked forward with slow, deliberate steps, the steps of someone who had already won. My article goes live Monday morning, she said. The SEC has already executed search warrants. Your partners are resigning. Your political connections are distancing themselves. Your firm is bleeding money by the minute. Garrett's throat bobbed as he swallowed. This is over, Sarah said, final and cold. And you handed us the last piece of evidence yourself. Felicia watched him crumble, not with joy, not with hatred, but with a solemnity carved from 3 years of sacrifice. Garrett looked at her with red, furious eyes. You destroyed me. Felicia shook her head. No, Mr. Whitmore, you destroyed yourself. I just told the truth loudly enough for people to hear. She stepped closer, close enough for only him to hear the next words. When you bankrupted Morrison Medical, when you wiped out my mother's life savings, you told the world that people like us don't matter. Her voice softened, but the hurt beneath it was a blade. You were wrong, Garrett staggered backward, gripping the edge of the table for stability. One by one, more diners stood, faces full of anger, disappointment, betrayal. You ruined my retirement. I trusted your expertise. You told us to buy more. You scammed us. The accusations swirled around him like a storm he could no longer contain. Caroline Hayes approached slowly, no longer the hesitant woman beside him, but someone seeing him clearly for the first time. Garrett, she said, her voice shaking. I believed in you. I defended your strategies. I told my clients you were brilliant. She took a breath that trembled. But this is unforgivable. Garrett reached for her arm. Caroline, please. She pulled away. We're pulling every dollar from Whitmore Capital, today. Those words struck harder than any slap. Then came the final blow. Felicia stepped forward again, her eyes steady. You asked me for financial advice, she said softly. Here it is. The room leaned in. Arrogance, she continued, is the most expensive investment a man can make. And today? She paused. You're bankrupt. Garrett sagged, his shoulders collapsing under the weight of a reality he could no longer deny. But the world had only just begun to react. And by the next morning, Felicia Turner's name would be known across the nation. By the time Felicia stepped out of the Meridian Club and into the bright Manhattan sunlight, she felt strangely weightless, like someone who had been carrying the same boulder for years and finally set it down. But she didn't yet know the world was already watching. Someone inside the restaurant had recorded everything, every insult, every revelation, every gasp, every second of Garrett's downfall, and they posted it online. Within an hour, the clip hit 1 million views. By evening, 10 million, and by midnight, 50 million. It spread like wildfire across platforms. Waitress destroys arrogant billionaire with his own fraud data. Black woman outsmarts Wall Street titan on camera. The analyst they tried to ignore. Felicia's name trended in all 50 states. Her co-workers messaged her in disbelief. Old classmates from Columbia reached out. Former Goldman analysts sent stunned congratulations. Some viewers begged for more financial tips. Others said her bravery gave them hope. Many just kept replaying the moment she said, "You're sweating, Mr. Whitmore." Meanwhile, the consequences for Garrett were immediate and catastrophic. Monday morning, markets opened. Nexus Technologies resumed trading at $31 a share, down nearly 80%. Panic triggered a wave of sell-offs. Whitmore Capital faced over $2 billion in redemption requests. Major clients fled. Partners resigned. Employees refused to defend him. And then, the SEC publicly confirmed the investigation. Federal prosecutors followed. Search warrants were executed. Documents seized. Phones confiscated. The empire he built over 3 decades collapsed in 48 hours. Felicia watched the news like someone watching a storm she'd predicted years ago. She didn't smile. She didn't feel triumph. Only a deep, quiet exhale, like her lungs finally remembered how to breathe. Then came the knock on her door. She opened it to find a woman with kind eyes and an NYU notebook in hand. "Ms. Turner?" the woman asked softly. "My name is Professor Laura Mendez. I teach finance. My students saw your video and they want you to speak to them." Felicia blinked. "Me?" "You," the professor said warmly. "They said you made the markets make sense, and they want to learn from you." Felicia hesitated, then smiled. Her visibility had transformed from humiliation into influence. But Felicia's biggest moment wasn't a viral video or a headline. Her real victory waited in a small Harlem apartment, where someone had been waiting to hear the truth. It was evening when Felicia finally returned home. The hallway light flickered as she pushed open the front door of the modest Harlem apartment she shared with her mother. A familiar scent, lavender lotion and home-cooked rice, wrapped around her like a memory. Her mother, Ruth Turner, sat in her hospital bed near the window, watching the news on a small TV. When Felicia stepped inside, the broadcaster's voice echoed through the room. "In a stunning development, billionaire hedge fund manager Garrett Whitmore was taken into custody earlier this afternoon." Ruth's eyes filled instantly with tears. Slow, glistening, heavy tears that carried 3 years of fear, regret, and unspoken guilt. Her mother's voice was still halting from the stroke, but the emotion in it was unmistakable. Felicia rushed to her side. "Mom, it's okay! It's done!" Ruth pointed to the screen. They say, "You hero." Felicia took her mother's trembling hand and held it tight. "I'm not a hero," she whispered. "I'm your daughter, and I just finished what Uncle Tommy started." Ruth's tears spilled freely now. "So proud." Felicia rested her forehead gently against her mother's. "He can rest now, and so can you." They stayed like that for a long time, mother and daughter, survivors of a storm that had nearly drowned them both. The next morning brought more news. Garrett's bail set at $50 million, the same amount he'd mocked her with. A class-action lawsuit amassed over 1,000 plaintiffs. His properties were being frozen and catalogued. His mugshot circulated everywhere, a symbol of downfall and hypocrisy. And Felicia? Offers poured in. Goldman Sachs wanted her back. Morgan Stanley offered to double her previous salary. CNBC requested her as a recurring guest. Netflix inquired about rights to her story, but Felicia chose something different. With her share of the lawsuit settlement and donations flooding in from viewers inspired by her courage, she opened the Morrison Financial Literacy Center, named in honor of her uncle. Free classes, free resources, a place where people like her mother could finally understand money instead of being crushed by it. On opening day, the line wrapped around the block. An elderly man whispered, "You're the woman from the video!" Felicia smiled. "I'm the woman who's here to help." And for the first time in years, she felt whole. She had taken back her life, her future, her voice. The invisible waitress was invisible no more. But Felicia's story wasn't just about justice. It was about transformation. And soon, the world would learn just how far her influence would reach. 6 months passed, and Felicia Turner's life no longer resembled the quiet existence she once lived between caregiving and waitressing shifts. Her days now unfolded in classrooms, community centers, auditoriums and conference halls, places where ordinary people sat hungry to understand the forces that shaped their financial lives. Everywhere she went, someone recognized her. "You're the one who exposed that billionaire. You're the reason I pulled my retirement out of a bad fund. You helped me understand my mortgage. You inspired me to start saving again." Felicia never grew used to it. She didn't want fame. She wanted change. And slowly, piece by piece, she watched that change spread. The Morrison Financial Literacy Center became a sanctuary for the forgotten. Grandparents blindsided by high-interest loans, new parents overwhelmed by medical bills, young adults drowning in credit traps. Her center grew so quickly, she had to rent the building next door. Caroline Hayes, once Garrett's trusted associate, became one of the center's biggest donors. She showed up to volunteer nearly every week, humbled, transformed. "I spent years believing the wrong people," Caroline said one afternoon, as she handed Felicia a folder of updated curriculum material. "Now I want to invest in the right ones." Felicia smiled. "Then you're exactly where you belong." Across the nation, universities began using her viral video as a case study in ethics classes. High schools invited her to speak. Financial podcasts begged for interviews. Lawmakers debated new regulations inspired by the scandal she helped expose. Even the SEC quietly thanked her, but not everyone was grateful. One evening, outside the center, Felicia found an envelope taped to the door. No return address. Inside, a single sheet of paper with a handwritten message. "You should have stayed invisible." Derek, who had transferred to the center as an administrative assistant, frowned when he saw it. "You want me to call the police?" Felicia folded the note calmly. "No." "Why not?" She looked at the darkened street, the city lights stretching out like a constellation of untold stories. "Because this letter came from someone who fears change. And fear means we're making progress." The world was shifting, slowly, unevenly, but undeniably, and Felicia wasn't done yet. Later that week, she received an unexpected letter from a women's shelter in Queens. A young single mother had written, "Your story made me believe I could start over. You don't know me, but you saved me." Felicia pressed the letter to her chest. She knew exactly what that felt like, to be unseen, unheard, and pushed aside. But she also knew something else. She had risen. And now, she wanted to help others rise too. But the final chapter of this story did not belong to Felicia. It belonged to the man who once believed himself untouchable. 15 months after the scandal, far from Manhattan's glittering skyline, a rusted gate slid open with a metallic groan. Inside, the federal correctional facility was silent except for distant footsteps and the occasional call of a guard. In a cramped cell, lit by a single flickering bulb, sat Garrett Whitmore III, the man who once dined on marble floors and drank champagne before noon. Now he sat on a steel bunk, dressed in prison khaki, staring blankly at the grey wall. His trial had been swift, the evidence overwhelming: securities fraud, wire fraud, market manipulation. 15 years, no parole. His estates had been seized, his accounts frozen, his reputation obliterated. The empire he'd built on lies had turned to dust. A guard approached, tossing a padded envelope onto his bunk. Mail. Garrett tore it open without interest. He rarely received anything now. Inside was a neatly folded newspaper, the Wall Street Journal. The front-page headline hit him like a blow. Morrison Financial Literacy Center wins national recognition, empowering underserved communities across America. A photo beneath showed Felicia standing at a podium, smiling gently beside her mother. People applauded behind her, teachers, families, senior citizens, young students, all touched by her work. Garrett's hands trembled. Then he noticed the small white note tucked behind the newspaper. Just 2 words. Still teaching. He stared at the message, feeling a heaviness that had nothing to do with the prison walls around him. For the first time in his life, the consequences weren't numbers, laws, or losses. They were names, faces, people. Something unfamiliar spread in his chest. Something that might have been regret, or grief, or simply the realization that he had never truly been powerful. He had been feared, he had been wealthy, he had been ruthless, but he had never been right. And the woman he tried to humiliate, the woman he dismissed without seeing, had risen higher than he ever imagined. He set the note on his bunk, staring at it for a long time. Outside, a guard shouted for lights out. Garrett lay back on his thin mattress and closed his eyes. This time, there was no empire to protect him. No audience to clap for him. No wealth to shield him. Just silence, and the echo of 2 words he couldn't escape. Still teaching. Felicia Turner proved that even the quietest person in the room can rewrite the ending. And sometimes, the greatest power comes from simply telling the truth. If this story moved you, don't leave without hitting subscribe. Real stories of courage, justice, and unexpected triumph drop here every day. Turn on notifications so you never miss a moment where the underdog rises. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that no one is invisible, and no act of arrogance goes unanswered. Remember, truth has power. You have power. Thank you for watching. Now let's continue the journey together. Coming up next, a millionaire thought he could embarrass a struggling pregnant waitress in front of an entire restaurant. He laughed at her, mocked her, threw money at her feet. But what she whispered back, 5 small words, stopped him cold and exposed a truth he never expected. Tap the video on your screen to watch the moment a woman with nothing left to lose turned humiliation into justice.